Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. It depends on the time that you're looking at me, you're watching my video. I would like to thank you for watching the video. Thank you for showing interest in my communication. And thank you to the organizers of the International Congress for the opportunity to participate in it. My name is Manuel, and I will be talking about flipping Shakespeare's Macbeth, flipped classroom as a study to test the effectivity of flipped classroom as a method to introducing and teaching literature in pre-service in primary education, EFL, in primary education at university level, so to say. I'd like to begin by giving a little bit of an introduction to the topic, what motivated and what motivates this presentation. Then I will talk about a little bit of a literature review, and then I'm going to talk about the project, the case study itself. So to begin with the introduction, I'd like to say that at the beginning of 2020 and until very recently, even today, 23, COVID-19 has been disrupting and has been showing the disruptive effects in education with a clear impactful consequences in all educational levels, ranging from preschool to higher education and university studies. In 2021, 2 years ago, the OECD Initial Stance, or Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, published some interesting results obtained from a survey conducted along the lockdown confinement of March 2020. In this publication, the international organism listed that in the period which comprised at least March to May 2020, all responding to the survey countries had closed campuses, schools, and other educational institutions due to COVID-19, or as a measure of action against the spread of the disease. As proved and demonstrated by research and researchers, flipped classrooms served as an effective tool to shift education to more interactive and online environments during COVID-19 pandemic. However, it has also been elicited by many interesting and recent research that many educational institutions lowered their expectations toward performance of their students as teachers and instructors identified a lack of motivation that had a very negative impact on their teaching learning process. And significantly, this situation coincides with the implementation of flipped classroom in many schools and universities. We could state that flipped classroom can be described as a methodological tool and a didactical approach that can be used in very different situations, such as the one I just described for the lockdowns in March 2020, because it is one of the most student-oriented tools available for today, or so research demonstrates, as well as one of the most flexible tools available for teachers to enhance their students' participation and motivations, which is this affirmation is supported by the research listed between the parentheses. However, when approaching the academic study of flipped classroom, it must be noted that it is not a new concept born as a result of the pandemic. Even when most of its theoretical development and practical implementation happened during the pandemic lockdowns described before, in the light of the previews, it is essential to mention that it is academically acclaimed that we owed flipped classroom as a methodology and a pedagogical approach, and also the coining of the concept to research carried out in 2013 by Samson Bergman. It has also been elicited by interesting recent research that many educational institutions lowered their expectations. However, we are going to try to demonstrate if that last affirmation is true by testing with a case study presented in this presentation. As a result, and with the intention of understanding the effectiveness of flipped classroom, the main objective of this case study is to determine to what extent is flipped classroom valid in introducing difficult and demanding reading texts in the English as a second language or English as a foreign language classroom at the university level. This objective briefly responds to the two investigation questions. Is the performance of students exposed to flipped classroom better than those following a more traditional methodology? Or on the other hand, is flipped classroom related to all the perceived effectiveness of a syllabus as students, learners' motivation to take part in when it is challenging? We will try to answer those two questions with this brief presentation. Before I go on with the presentation, I'd like to note that this presentation and its contents are part of a self-directed and guided project introducing complex texts in pre-service primary English as a foreign language syllabi. The project has been partially published in Matthias 2021, 2022, and 2023. However, the contents of this presentation have not been published, distributed, or circulated in any form yet. The objectives of this case study, we present a case study that aims at determining to what extent, if at all, flipped classroom is a valid form of introducing difficult and demanding reading texts into the English as a second language and English as a foreign language classroom at a university level. In the case of this study, the content objective is the introduction of reading passages of Macbeth, written by William Shakespeare, in a specialized university course of English learners. In previous experiences with similar profile students, introducing demanding texts and difficult texts has been an obstacle in the teaching learning process, and we aim at exploring the possibilities that flipped classroom can offer in overcoming the difficulties experienced before, which had hindered considerably the process of learning and teaching with difficult and demanding texts. To reach the objectives that I set before in this study, we have posed ourselves with the two following research questions. Is the performance of students exposed to flipped classroom better than those following a traditional methodology? Is flipped classroom related to the perceived effectiveness of a syllabus? By answering these two questions, we hope not only to fulfill these two main objectives that I set in the previous slide, but also to comprehend better the dimension of flipped classroom as an active methodology. Hopefully, this will enable us to also explore the learner's perception of the possibilities of implanting flipped classroom as a stable methodology in their educational system, and not only as a resource or combined together with other pedagogical approaches devoted to help enhance their competencies and abilities. Inevitably, as this case study has an empirical approach to applying and implementing flipped classroom as a tool to enhance university students' reading competence, it will also help us to understand the teacher's perceptions to the effectiveness of the tool as opposed to other tools used on other occasions. We will pay special attention to the individual variation and individual performance. The methodology of this case study. The basis of the methodology employed in this case study and also in the whole project can be found in the works of Kumar, 2005, and the concept of action research as a means to action seeking the improvement of some areas of concern in case studies with variation within participant group. Identifying an area of concern leads to research acting within the limit of such an area. As a result, peripheral and not essential variables are not counted in the action of research. This allows the researcher to focus on the main objectives and to present conclusions that can be directly linked to the core of his, her, or their investigation process. In other words, action research approach to case study methodology allows to address the identified problems while measuring the effectivity of our approach to it. In a context as the one already described in this work, the main problem identified is clearly the difficulty and the apathy of students perceive and feel when approaching themselves in their studies. In this particular context, it's inevitably to pose ourselves with the following question. Is it the reading of difficult text what causes the apathy in the students that makes them feel demotivated, or is it the methodology selected? To answer the previous question, we propose the following method of analysis. First, the class is divided in two groups. Group 1, the intervention group, follows the classes according to flipped classroom. At home, reading passages of Macbeth as homework. This is accompanied by supporting videos, podcasts, vocabulary explanations, complex literary terms explained, comprehension texts, and quizzes. Group number 2, or non-intervention group, followed a traditional approach to reading and understanding complex texts, reading in class and discussing in situ specific questions about text understanding and reading texts. Secondly, we conducted an anonymous perceived effectivity and satisfaction survey. Then we collected the data. Formative and summative data were collected from students' homework packages, comprehension texts, quizzes, and reading texts in class. And then we proceed to data analysis. All data were transferred into descriptive statistics to text to what extent the scores differ and how effectivity is perceived in each of the different groups. This is a visual summarizing of the methodology that I just described. Results and discussion are essential in this presentation. So I will focus for some time in presenting and discussing the results from this case study. This case study has reached some interesting findings that have helped us draw some conclusions about the study conducted itself. One of the most significant conclusions we have reached is linked to participation study. As the study was conducted in what are normally regarded as seminar classes, the students and learners could not be forced to attend all the lessons or do their tasks. As a result of what we have mentioned above, those following flipped classroom may have identified the potential of face-to-face discussion and scaffolding necessary to fully activate all the benefits that this method can offer. Those in the intervention group benefited from their attendance to face-to-face classes, as opposed to those following a more traditional method that attended less to their proposed seminars. This may be one reason that could explain why those following flipped classroom and a non-traditional approach to reading difficult texts attended lessons and did their request tasks in a much higher percentage, 90%, than those not following the inverted methodology, which actually was a 75%. This can actually be seen in the following graph, when we can actually see the 90% as opposed to the 75%. Another conclusive finding we can highlight is that even when attendance and participation of the non-intervention group was lower, their test scoring in summative and formative sessions and homework reading tests were significantly higher. The intervention group reached media of 92% in the tests, while the non-intervention group reached 81%. One of the reasons that may explain this fact is tradition. Traditionally, students perceive the need to study the lecture material more than which has presented in alternative ways. Opposed to the previous significant finding, we can say that in overall performance represented with the results in the final assessment tests, the group following a more traditional approach to teaching difficult reading scored higher than those following the flipped classroom methodology, 78 as opposed to 70%. One of the many reasons that can explain this fact is that, as we have already stated, the perception of lecture content and tradition seem to be identified with study and learning content more than materials and data presented in a more alternative and interactive way. This can be seen in the following graph, when we can actually see that those following the traditional approach rank higher than those following flipped classroom, both in test result and in final assessment. However, even when the intervention group score lower in their summative and formative tests, as seen in the graph number 2, the graph before, the group following flipped classroom methodology acquire better peripheral knowledge, important data related to the topic and the reading, and showed a better performance in the formative quizzes applied during the different sessions. This is a very significant finding because the intervention group achieved a higher percentage, 95, in the formative quizzes, even when their text understanding quizzes showed that the text understanding was almost equivalent to the non-intervention group. This shows that flipped classroom multiplies the possibilities of learning to exploit their resources, and that, as stated by recent research, knowledge acquired through inverted methodologies is prone to remain longer in students' learners' memories. The results mentioned related to text understanding, however, seem not to relate to the previous knowledge participants may have had of the play, the period, and the life of the author, as the results in the administered pre-test show very significant results in both groups, 40 and 44%. These can be seen in the graph. We can actually see the distribution is quite similar in pre-test, and then the formative quizzes actually differ a lot. Conclusions. To finish this presentation by offering a couple of preliminary conclusions. This study, in my opinion, sheds some light on the state of the question of flipped classroom when applied to the introduction of difficult and demanding texts in a university context. It is undeniable that although flipped classroom has many class-oriented implications and effectively serve as an effective tool to introduce and explore concepts and theories and to enhance the students' attention and participation, it proves to be, at least so far, an effective tool to solve the problem identified in this study. And consequently, considering the results obtained, it may not be the most efficient tool to introduce highly demanding texts such as Macbeth in the classroom selected. However, given the small population of this study presented here, only 66 learners, we do not intend to draw universal conclusions, and thus we cannot prove, nor is our intention, that flipped classroom is a detrimental method. Quite the contrary, many of the results obtained indicate a very similar level of performance, with a much higher degree of satisfaction and enjoyment. We should not be discarded as simply superficial, but should be considered to produce more engaging classes, lectures, and lessons that help reduce the apathy identified towards difficult and demanding texts. Recent research shows that motivation and enjoyment ultimately leads to better results. It is evident that flipped classroom as a pedagogical approach has the potential to revolutionize the educational system and to allocate part of the teaching learning process out of the classroom. This is the main reason why the link between difficult and demanding reading texts and the methodology and its proceedings should be and will be explored in future research. Thank you for listening to me and watching my video. I remain open to questions, comments, and remarks, and I will be thankful to listen from your feedback. Thank you very much.